Project schedule planning. When am I going to be done? Or better yet, you probably heard this phrase, are we there yet? Well, when you plan your schedule out, you're basically taking your project and trying to figure out when you're going to start, when you're going to finish, and pretty much, are you there yet? So let's talk about putting your schedule together for your project so you can communicate when you're going to be done to your stakeholders. The project schedule includes the sequence of activities, the duration plan for each activity, and relationships or dependencies between the beginnings and ends of different activities. The project schedule is created after the scope planning has created the work breakdown structure, or WBS, and before the project resource planning occurs. Let's talk about task dependencies. You could have a finish to start dependency, which basically means that after an activity has completed, you immediately start the next activity. You could have a start to start dependency, meaning that both activities must start at the same time or at the end of a previous activity. The last task dependency you have is finish to finish, which simply means that before you move on to an activity, you have one or more activities that are completed as a requirement. Let's talk about leads and lags. A lagging activity means that this activity can start after another one has started, where one task must wait in relationship to another task. And a leading task is one that must start before the predecessor is done. In other words, it must start before the activity actually gets going. Let's talk about milestones. Milestones are very important checkpoints. They usually are the completion of a major task or represent the completion of a major task and or a major set of tasks. Target dates will be set later, but a milestone basically gives you a pulse on how the project is going. Let's talk about creating a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a horizontal bar chart with a list of activities on the left and a timeline on the horizontal axis. A traditional Gantt chart does not show dependencies. Many current Gantt charts add the critical path and arrows to indicate tasks that precede other tasks. Here's an example of a Gantt chart. As you can see, there are 12 tasks on the left and a series of numbers to represent the weeks that the tasks are used in duration to the project. As you see here, this gives you a visualization of the project and everything that needs to happen and when it should happen. A network diagram is another tool used for schedule planning. It's also known as a PERT chart or a PERT/CPM chart. It illustrates the tasks and their relationships, and is also used to determine the critical path. Software can be used to create a network diagram. Here's the example of a network diagram for a wedding. As you can see, the major tasks are put in an order so you can see how to progress from the start of the project to the end of the project. What you should notice is that the 3 tasks, including pick printer, design invitations, and print invitations, all have to happen before you address the invitations, where picking the calligrapher who's going to do the actual work on those invitations is one of the tasks that happens before you address the invitations. There's a lot of activity that can occur between pick calligrapher as an activity or task and address invitations as a task. You want to know this as a project manager because it tells you how much slack you have in your project, and it also shows you the critical path. Let's talk about the critical path for a second. The critical path happens when you have multiple paths that exist in the diagram, and the longest duration of those different activities represents what we call the critical path. If any task on the critical path is delayed, the entire project is delayed. Tasks not on the critical path have slack available. This is the amount of time the task could be delayed without delaying the completion of the project. As a project manager, one of the most important things you can do is figure out what your critical path is in executing your project. You must know how much time and duration the project has before any of the tasks and activities now have an impact on making you delayed or late in delivering the outcome to your stakeholders. So make sure you learn how to calculate the critical path of a project and manage the project accordingly. Here's an example of the critical path. As you see here, we go from Task A, secure funds. B, negotiate with other agencies. C, form an advisory group. Now, once we get to C, we have 3 different paths we could take. We can agree to a distribution plan, we can establish a data collection plan, or identify a printer. But no matter what we do, we must stay on the critical path of establishing a data plan, task D, collect data, task E, write directory text, task F, print directory, I, and distribute the directory, which is task L. As you see here, if any one of those tasks get off track, then the entire project is off track. Whereas with the 2 alternative paths, you have slack, or you have the opportunity to be able to do other activities and not make the project late. Quickly, we could talk about slack as the amount of time a task could be delayed without delaying the completion of the project. This is why we need to understand as project managers what the critical path is. The tasks on the critical path have 0 slack, but for tasks that are not on the critical path, work backwards from the project duration to determine the amount of slack that you have. In this example, slack for task K is 2 weeks. If task K is delayed by less than 2 weeks, it will not delay the completion date of the entire project. That is why this is important to know as a project manager. We have different types of slack: total slack, free slack, and safety slack. Total slack is the allowable delay of an activity without delaying the project. Free slack is allowable delay of an activity without affecting the earlier start of any dependent activity. And safety slack is the remaining allowable delay of an activity if all predecessors or activities that start before that specific activity finish as late as possible. In finalizing the project schedule, you may have to negotiate with sponsors or adjust customer expectations before you finalize that schedule. The schedule will be impacted by project resource plans, and as you're developing the schedule, you have to monitor the critical path tasks most closely. In summary, the project schedule shows when each activity will take place and the dependencies between activities. The activities or work packages are derived from the work breakdown structure, which was developed in project scope planning. The task dependencies may be finish to start, start to start, finish to finish, and includes leads and lags. Your milestones are checkpoints. Activity sequencing is determined by the dependencies. The Gantt chart, which is a popular tool in project management, is a horizontal timeline showing when each activity is scheduled, along with optional indicators of task progress. Network diagrams help project managers illustrate task dependencies and determine the critical path.